20 minutes of the best top expert tips and hacks to make your life better. LifeHakx. Technology, business, multimedia, wellness and health, events, reviews, and more. This is Mary Collins from LifeHakx Media on Radio X, and I have the pleasure to have Jonathan Green online with us today. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Hi, I'm very good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm looking forward to a really wonderful summer. So I'm just going to tell the audience a little bit more about you. Jonathan Paul Green is a production designer, and today he's going to give us some production design hacks. He has worked on things such as Atlanta, which is now available on Netflix, Fleabag episodes, Some Motherhood, and also a feature film that's coming out fairly soon. So with that, Jonathan, give us some information about how you got into production design in the first place.
So I went to art school and I did a fine art sculpture degree. And while I was there, I kind of always felt I didn't want to just be an artist on my own in my own studio doing my own thing without seeing anybody. And I was I'd always had an interest in theatre design, actually. So I sent a letter to a company that was massive at the time, back in the late 80s, called Spitting Image. And I said to them, I'm a sculptor. Do you ever need any sculptors making your puppets? And long story short, they offered me a job. And that was literally my first job in TV, was making puppets for Spitting Image. Which, you know, in its day, it was a huge show. So to have something like that on your CV was great. And that was kind of my way into the industry.
All right. Well, I mean, it's amazing that being able to reach out back in those days, and you can even tell people nowadays, that's one of the top hacks, is that there may be a million of you, but go ahead and which in that case, in that time, there wasn't, but just go ahead and do some research, write to the right person, and you never know, you might just be lucky and get started. So speaking of getting started, how would you say you would get started with each new project? Is there a set system? Is there a technique that you use?
Well, so the good thing about this job is that every job is different. So there's not really, I mean, there is kind of a structure that I do, but because every job has different requirements, there's all sorts of different things that need to happen. But generally, the very first thing you'll do is read a script. And then from the script, you kind of start to formulate ideas about how you feel something should look. And then you would probably, the next step would be mood boards. I mean, sometimes you have to, like if I go for an interview, be it online or in person, they kind of expect you to have read the script and bring some mood boards with you to kind of talk about the direction that you see the production design going in. So that's always the first starting point: script, mood boards, and then after that, then there's many different things. But ultimately, you're ultimately you're looking to design the world that the production is.
Right. And speaking of worlds, we now are entering a world of virtual effects and a lot of green screening. Does this affect your job quite significantly, or is there still quite a need for set building and design?
I think there will always be a need for set building, because even now with virtual production, there's always real set elements to the virtual background, and it's much harder for actors and actresses to act in a blank space than it is for them to interact in a real space. So I think there's always going to be a need for the design side of it, and whether more of that becomes digital design or not, I think it's still the same kind of discipline.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you find, I mean, I guess there's a big difference between working on a TV set versus an exhibit versus a film set. Speaking of which, you've also worked with the Ice Hotel.
Oh yeah.
So what would you say have been some of your most difficult projects, or, you know, also exciting?
So I mean, again, that's the beauty of my job, is that every job has different challenges and brings different things to it. The Ice Hotel is not a TV related project. It's actually building a room for the Ice Hotel, which is great because it's a really nice departure from production design. But I'm still doing some design element within it, and it's a really exciting project, and just lovely to be involved with all the talented people and artists that go to the Ice Hotel. Other jobs, I mean, challenges. Gosh, I mean, the thing is, I feel like I learn something new on every single job. There's always a new challenge that you haven't come across before, which, again, I find that really appealing. I think the biggest challenge is being able to achieve the ambition for the money. That's generally the biggest challenge, is the budget and the time. The good thing, things that make jobs great are working with collaborative people and people that allow heads of department to do their job rather than being too prescriptive about what they need to do. Because at the end of the day, there's no point in hiring someone and saying, okay, it's got to look like this, and this has to be this, and this has to be that. Go away and do it. You want people to bring their own ideas, and that's when you get a really exciting end product.
Right. Allowing creativity to flow.
Definitely.
And so is there any particular like editing programs that you would use yourself now with set design, or that, I mean, what do you recommend people to sort of integrate together?
Yeah. So I personally, and this is my own personal choice, I use SketchUp for a lot of my design. It's a 3D design program. Other people use more complicated design programs. I kind of stick to that because I know it and it's easy for me to use. But I think certainly these days, most people tend to design in some sort of 3D CAD software.
Okay. So good old CAD, still quite the fashion.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, I always start with pencil and paper just to get my idea onto the page, and then I'll build it on my computer.
Why work harder when you can work smarter and live better? LifeHakx.
So Paul, speaking of, top hacks for production design, you were saying start with a pencil and a piece of paper, start with a sketch pad, get those ideas out to begin with, right?
Yeah, I mean, that works for me because I guess I'm a bit more old school, and I was always taught drawing, and that was like the fundamental basic creative skill. Nowadays, I think my daughter's at art school. They don't even teach drawing, which I find really depressing. But
what do they teach?
They just teach you to think about stuff.
Okay. Well, I would have survived in art school then because I can't draw a straight line.
I mean, wow. It's just such a fundamental communication skill in this world, is to be able to do a scribble on a paper and show it to someone and say, "Is this what you mean?"
Right. Exactly.
It's a key skill. So I would say drawing is. You don't have to be the best at drawing, but it's just a great skill to have.
Right. And so what are some of the first mistakes that you made back then that you wish you had knowledge of now? What would you have changed?
I think in the very early days, it was more admin kind of mistakes, like dealing with the budget correctly. I feel like those kind of logistical things, the kind of the only things that experience teaches you. And I feel like throughout my career, I don't think there's a shortcut to experience. I think you just have to be able to learn on the job and learn from things and from your mistakes. And that's what makes you a better person in the end, is just having a vast knowledge. And you can only really get that by putting in the years.
Right. And speaking of that, I mean, we have a lot of new graduates who just want to go straight into tops paying
Yeah.
salaried work. Is there still an old school mentality of kind of get on the job for lesser money and learn and make sure and get a working relationship? Or is there a lot more contracts now where there's a set pay across scale?
Mm. It's a really tricky one at the moment because, particularly in the UK, the industry is so massively buoyant and busy
Hmm.
that certainly last year there was a time when there was not enough people to employ.
Wow.
And so you could end up with a very inexperienced crew,
Mm.
and that can make life quite difficult if there's too many inexperienced people in a team. And I think that gave a bit of a false kind of perspective for a lot of new joiners into the industry that every job was super well paid. And it really isn't the case. You know, there's a vast spectrum, even within feature films, from micro budgets to multi-million pound budgets
Hmm.
and everything in between. And the same in TV. There's still low budget TV being made by terrestrial channels that can't compete with the likes of Netflix and Amazon and Apple. And then there is the high end TV aspect where, you know, you might be paid as well as a feature film. And I think certainly last year, because of this kind of lack of crew, rates were being pushed higher, which in itself is great because rates have been kind of stagnant for a long time. So I feel like we're in a position where it's kind of the rates are where they should be now. But for people that have joined the industry, you know, maybe 1, 2, 3 years ago, that's all they know.
Hmm.
And so they kind of expect that the rates are going to be like that for every job. I think that causes a little bit of difficulty sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's, you know, it's a positive thing because there is a big demand for new people in the industry.
Hmm. And speaking of industry, you know, writers have contracts, directors, producers. What are the kind of contracts that you have to? I imagine that there's non-disclosures also involved in set design.
Hmm. Yeah, there is. More often than not, you can't kind of really talk about too much about a production until it's gone out. And then, even then, you know, I know on some of the bigger movies like Star Wars, they're very, very strict about what you're able to talk about or show or, you know, all of that sort of thing. Not quite so much in TV. Generally, that happens in pre-production before maybe the cast has been announced and all of that sort of thing. But you know, you just got to
How do
be
you protect?
professional.
Right, but how do you protect yourself as well in a contract? Do you sort of have a set where should people say, look, I expect, is it just like a regular salaried, is it like a regular job where it's, you get paid after production or during production? What's the
Yeah,
sort of thing to
you
expect?
generally you would be paid weekly on a production from the beginning. But again, you know, every job is different. The structure and feature films is slightly different, for example. Um, I think the thing about contracts is until you're kind of like an HOD, you're basically, there's not too much you can push back against. Basically, the contract is the same for almost everybody.
Mhm.
And, you know, obviously there's room for negotiation on your wages, and, you know, you can argue specific points with the line producer. But it's very difficult to make any kind of big changes on a contract. But then you can always just choose not to take the job if it doesn't suit you.
Right. Read the contract and read, see where it's going, if anything,
Yeah, you
production.
must always read the contract because sometimes, you know, I've not known it so much recently, but there can be slightly more shady production companies that have clauses in there that you wouldn't want to sign. So it is important to check it out and also speak to other people on the team if you're concerned, and speak to your head of department as well.
That's another thing people need to understand. The industry, as big as it is also quite small.
Hmm.
And the way one behaves around other teammates or crewmates is really important because word does get around, doesn't it? So
Yeah, for sure.
would that be one of your top hacks, like
I
get to know
think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of important to know your rights within the industry, what's expected of you. And again, these are things that you won't know when you first join because you haven't had the experience. But I guess my biggest thing is just being a decent person, being a team player.
Absolutely. And right now, you've just finished Atlanta. Is there anything you want to tell us about the technicalities or creative juice that went into it?
It was such a fabulous job. It was one of the best jobs I've worked on, I have to say. And so much of that is down to the scripts and the writers and the performers. And, sometimes you get lucky and you get to work with great people. But we had a lot of fun on Atlanta and a lot of creative freedom. And I feel like this season, they kind of stepped up the visual side of it in quite a big way. And partly because for the first time they were abroad rather than being in Atlanta. And we shot in London, Paris, and Amsterdam, which was great. And we got to do some really fun things.
And that's got to be one of the best hacks about being in production design is that ability to travel and see new and exciting places as well as learn techniques. Is there anything that makes sometimes production a bit of a struggle? I mean, how long are you away on like the Ice Hotel? And there was another project, if I remember, that we chatted about that you were away for months.
Yes.
At the time.
Yeah, Ice Hotel's only 2 weeks, so that's quite
not too bad.
Isn't it? A very intensive, cold, hard 2 weeks, but it's amazing. Mm-hmm. I did a job in Fiji, and I was away for 4 months in Fiji, and that is the complete opposite side of the world from the UK. So it's it's a 12-hour time difference, and it's 24 hours of travel to get there. But it was amazing. I mean, 4 months seems like a long time. It went pretty quickly, actually. And the family did come out and visit as well. They came and had a holiday in Fiji, so that was nice. But that work-life balance is probably one of the hardest things about this job because it's all-encompassing, and you kind of really have to dedicate a lot of time and effort to working in it. And it takes over a big chunk of your life. So finding that work-life balance is very, very difficult. I'd say that's probably the hardest part of this job.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. And also, is there any point, I know you're super busy, but I was going to say, is there any point that you think you'll be doing a workshop online or in person on production
Possibly.
design?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always interested in doing things like that. And I always, on almost every job I do, I try and get work experience people that haven't worked in the industry but are maybe trying to get in the industry, and generally they're students on film and TV design courses, but I always try and do that, and I'll almost always answer everyone that emails me to ask me questions, time permitting. So if I can do something like that, I'd be very happy if I can find the time, for sure.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on you. And for people who are interested, one of Jonathan's websites is setdesign.tv or setdesignpoint.tv. Of course, we will be putting his information up on lifehakx.com. That's with a K and an X. And if anyone wants to reach out to Jonathan on social media, he is at JPG Design on Insta and Twitter. Jonathan, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lovely to see you again.
Last night a DJ saved my life. Last night a DJ saved my life. Yeah.
LifeHakx. LifeHakx.com. That's with a K and an X on Radio X.